Okay, so you're trying to navigate the world of finance, right? But, with a specific focus. You want options guided by Islamic Sharia principles.
Yeah, and actually finding investment tools that genuinely line up with those principles, well, that can be the tricky part.
Definitely. You need real clarity on what makes something compliant and how that's figured out in today's markets.
It's a complex stuff.
Which is exactly why our deep dive today is looking at something brand new in the Egyptian market. We've got the source material, all the detailed criteria, and the explanations for the very first Shari'a index on the Egyptian exchange.
And our mission here is basically to take those criteria apart, really unpack the specifics.
Understand the why behind each filter.
Exactly, and show you precisely how they go about screening companies. Think of it as a shortcut to understanding this particular way of approaching Shari'a-compliant investing in Egypt.
Okay, let's dive in. We're talking about the EGX 33 Shari'a index. The Egyptian exchange just launched it, June 12, 2024.
Right, very recent. And the guidance material we have makes its purpose pretty clear. It's meant to shed light on investment tools for different kinds of investors.
Aligning with international and local best practices, they say.
And it is genuinely a big deal. It's the first official Shari'a index for the EGX.
That's significant. And crucially, these rules they've set up, they aren't just pulled out of thin air, are they?
No, absolutely not. The criteria, they've been validated. There's a committee behind it, experienced scholars, economists.
People who really know both Islamic finance and the capital markets?
Precisely. They've put in the work to, translate those traditional Sharia principles into concrete, measurable rules that you can actually apply to modern companies listed on the stock exchange.
So how do they actually do that screening? What's the process?
Well, the core of it really boils down to 6 main criteria, 6 hurdles, basically, that a company has to clear to get into this index.
These are the filters the committee set up based on their interpretation of Shari'a for corporations.
Exactly.
Okay, first one, the absolute basics. What kind of ownership are we talking about? The criteria say only ordinary shares.
Right. And the thinking behind that, as the material lays out, is that ordinary shares represent actual direct ownership in the company.
So you get a piece of the business itself.
Yeah, a slice of it. Rights to profits, voting power, a stake in the company's assets if things wind down.
So making money from the growth of that actual business through this kind of genuine equity ownership, that's considered okay under Shari'a.
That's the principle, and they actually point to a specific source for this, the Islamic International Fiqh Academy's decision, way back in 1992 in Jeddah.
What did that say?
It basically affirmed that shares, provided they represent an undivided stake in permissible company assets and activities, are generally Shari'a-compliant to issue and trade. Yeah. So it connects this modern rule back to established scholarship.
Okay, makes sense. So beyond just the type of share, what's next? Rule 2 gets into the company's actual business, right?
Yes. Rule number 2 is about exclusion. If a company's primary activity goes against Shari'a principles, it's out.
That feels pretty fundamental. Like if the main thing a company does is, I don't know, conventional banking, making alcohol, running casinos.
Exactly. Those are incompatible. It's immediately excluded. And the criteria define primary activity clearly. It's the core business that generates the largest chunk of the company's revenue.
So it's focused on what they mostly do.
Right. And this focus on the primary activity, it aligns with other major Shari'a standards out there, like AAOII Standard 21 and the Dubai Financial Markets Standard. They take a similar approach.
Okay, but here's a nuance. What if a company's main business is fine, let's say manufacturing textiles, but maybe they have a tiny side operation that isn't, or they earn a bit of interest income?
Good question. The guidance addresses that. It clarifies that if there are minor secondary activities generating, say, haram income, it's that income that's considered forbidden.
Not the whole share.
Not necessarily. The share itself isn't automatically disqualified unless the main business is forbidden.
Okay.
Contemporary scholars, and this index reflects that view, generally permit investing in companies with a permissible main activity, even if there's some minor non-compliant income on the side. But there is a condition.
Righteous.
That non-compliant income needs to be identified and purified, given way to charity.
Got it. Which actually leads perfectly into the next rule, the first really specific financial test. Rule number 3, income from non-compliant activities can't be more than 5% of the total revenue.
Exactly. This is where they put a hard number on that minor non-compliant income we were just talking about.
So what counts towards this 5%?
The criteria spell it out. It includes income from Forbidden sales, maybe selling something impermissible as a side thing, and income from financial transactions that don't align with Shari'a.
Okay, like what kind of financial
Yeah.
transactions?
The examples they give are things like interest revenue from conventional bank accounts or deposits, or income from holding conventional debt like treasury bonds or bills. Also, returns from conventional investment funds that are based on debt, basically riba-driven income.
Interest, essentially.
Right. What's interesting, though, is what they say is generally not included in this 5% limit unless it's somehow tied to usury itself.
Such as?
Things like revenue from renting out property the company owns, or transportation fees, or even certain insurance services, if these come from the company's main permissible activity and the contracts themselves follow Shari'a rules.
Ah, so there's a distinction. Is the income from the core permissible business, or is it purely from a financial dealing, like earning interest?
Precisely. The criteria really emphasize that distinction, which Shari'a boards often make. Income from non-compliant activities like that side business, selling something forbidden that contributes to the 5% threshold for potentially excluding the whole company. But income from non-compliant financial transactions like interest earned on cash sitting in a conventional bank account that mainly requires purification by the investor, assuming the company passes all the other tests. It might not automatically kick the company out if it's below other thresholds.
That's quite nuanced.
It is.
Yeah.
And this kind of layered approach, looking at both activity income and financial income within that 5% filter, it actually lines up with how other big Islamic indices, like Dow Jones or S&P's Islamic indices, do their screening.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've looked at shares, main business, and dodgy income. Now for the big balance sheet tests. Rules 4 and 5 deal with debt and investments.
Exactly. These are major financial structure filters. Rule number 4 says the total value of a company's interest-bearing investments must not exceed 33%.
33%.
Of what?
Of either its total assets or its average market capitalization over the review period, whichever number is bigger, they take the higher value for the comparison.
Right, to be more conservative. And what counts as an interest-bearing investment here? Basically, anything held that's based on a usury contract. The criteria lists specifics. Conventional bank deposits, assets, or inventory intended for forbidden activities like making alcohol, conventional financial instruments like treasury bills or bonds.
So holding government debt would count.
Conventional government debt, yes. Also, investments in conventional debt-based funds. Even certain types of loans to other companies if there's interest charged beyond a certain point. And interestingly, they also include derivatives like forward contracts, options, and swaps here.
Okay, so this rule is trying to ensure the company isn't just parking its money or primarily making investments through conventional interest-based channels.
That's the core idea, making sure the asset side isn't overly reliant on riba.
All right. And then mirroring that, rule number 5 looks at the other side, the borrowing side.
Exactly. Total value of interest-bearing borrowings must also not exceed 33%.
Same threshold, 33%, compared again to total assets or average market cap, whichever's higher.
Correct. This one filters based on how the company finances itself. Is it heavily reliant on interest-based debt?
And what's included in borrowed amounts with interest. Similar things.
Pretty much the flip side. Conventional bank loans or credit facilities, conventional bank overdrafts if they charge interest, trade debts that have become usurious because of late payment penalties involving interest.
Holding forbidden bonds issued by others.
Yes, or issuing them yourself. Also, borrowing with interest from subsidiaries, and again, those derivative forwards, options, swaps can fall under this category too, depending on how they're structured and used.
So taken together, these two 33% rules, one for investments, one for borrowings, they act as pretty significant checks on the company's overall financial structure, making sure it's not too tangled up with conventional interest.
That's the goal. They are major quantitative screens.
Okay, 5 down, 1 to go. Rule number 6, this one seems a bit different. Value of liquid assets must not exceed 70% of total assets. What's that about?
Yeah, this one focuses on the composition of the company's assets. Liquid assets, according to the criteria for the specific index, means cash plus receivables.
Receivables being money owed to the company, right? Like unpaid invoices.
Exactly. Cash on hand plus debts owed to the company. And the sum of those two shouldn't be more than 70% of the company's total assets.
Why? What's the principle behind that rule?
The underlying idea here is to ensure that the company's main business involves trading in real things, actual assets, goods, services, or maybe rights, rather than primarily just dealing in money or debt itself.
Ah, Because Shari'a has different, often stricter rules for trading money or trading debt compared to trading goods and services.
Precisely. Trading currency or debt is much more restricted than trading tangible items. This 70% cap is meant to filter out companies that might look more like financial intermediaries just shuffling money or debt around, rather than businesses grounded in the real economy.
That's interesting. Does this come up in other standards?
Well, the source material actually notes some history here. It mentions that AAOIFI, the big standard-setting body, initially had a similar standard focused on liquid assets. But they later amended it, especially after issuing a standard specifically on selling debt, Standard 59. Their focus shifted more towards the company's primary activity rather than this strict percentage limit on liquids.
So why does the EGX 33 index keep it?
The documentation indicates that the EGX 33 Shari'a Committee deliberately decided to retain this 70% limit. They felt it was important for their specific filtering purposes, perhaps to ensure a certain quality or type of company within this particular Egyptian index. It reflects a specific choice made for this context.
Okay, so it's a conscious decision for this index, right?
Yeah.
So when you put all 6 of these criteria together, you look at the type of shares, the main business, you put limits on non-compliant income, check the levels of interest-based investments and borrowings, and even cap the liquid assets. What does this index ultimately give you, the investor?
What it gives you is a pre-screened list. It's a curated selection of companies listed on the Egyptian exchange that have successfully passed through this quite detailed, expert-vetted filtering process.
It simplifies things.
It aims to, yes. It's a practical tool designed to make it easier to find investment options that align with these specific Shari'a principles, as interpreted by this committee. Understanding these rules we just walked through is really the key to understanding what the index represents.
Yeah, it's not just a random list of companies. It's a list derived from a very clear, disclosed methodology based on these 6 points.
Exactly. So, to sort of sum up our deep dive here, the EGX 33 Shari'a Index is, well, it's a pretty significant new development for investors in the Egyptian market.
It's a structured guide, transparent, based on detailed criteria.
Vetted by experts in both fields, yeah. Designed to help you identify publicly traded companies in Egypt that align with a specific interpretation of Shari'a principles.
And those criteria, as we saw, they cover a lot of ground. The type of share, the core business, limits on problematic income sources, checks on interest-based investments and debt, and even that final check on asset composition to ensure it's grounded in tangible trading.
It's a really fascinating case study, isn't it? Seeing how these traditional religious principles get translated using financial ratios, revenue definitions, asset classifications into practical, applicable rules for modern corporations.
Absolutely. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Considering how these specific financial ratios and definitions are being used to interpret and apply broad Shari'a guidelines to complex contemporary companies, what further questions does that whole process raise for you about finding that right balance, between timeless principles and the realities of today's global financial system?